Chloe, Elgar, welcome to the Thought Room.
Yay! I'm so excited to be here with you.
I know. Before we got together today, I was reflecting on where our circles first overlapped.
Yeah?
I feel like we've known each other for a long time online.
Yeah, we have. It's been like maybe five years? Probably.
Yeah. And at that point, when I met you, you were living in British Columbia, in Canada, for those that don't know.
Yeah.
If you know, you know.
Yeah.
If you don't, I guess you don't.
Don't worry.
And I was living in New York. And at that point, I believe that you were on Instagram, Chloe's Countertop.
I was, yeah. Getting lots of spam emails for granite countertops.
Oh, really?
Yeah, daily.
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
But you weren't focused on countertops. At that point, you were focused on food, right?
Yeah, like holistic nutrition, healing, and intuition, but more like the focus was food and healing.
Yeah, and I can't remember how I first came across your page, but I was so intrigued by your energy. And even more so now, after reading your book, just finding it very, I wanted to say ironic, but that's not the word, perfect that you were really engrossed with food after hearing about your struggles with eating disorders and a variety of other things. It's like, wow, to witness you now in this place and this beautiful book revealed by darkness that you've birthed. I'm so excited to dive in with you today. So thanks for being here. This has been like a lot of rescheduling for both of us, and travel and renovations on homes. And
now we both live in Austin, Texas.
Oh yeah, that part's crazy.
Yeah.
That part's crazy because when did you move to Austin?
It'll be 2.5 years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
2.5 years. And I remember when you were in Vancouver, I was traveling there, and it was like it never really worked out for us to meet.
And I was in New York, and we tried. Yeah, it's funny how it's funny.
Mm-hmm.
It's always interesting.
And then didn't we run into each other at a taco place?
We just randomly ran into each other. Yeah, and I think that was like the day after our dog Blue died. So it was like really a crazy time. So
Right.
we bumped into you, and it was like, oh my gosh, this is Hallie.
Yeah.
In the flesh.
In the flesh. And that was the first time we had really met. And
Yeah.
Yeah, it was at a taco place. That's so hilarious.
So Austin.
Yeah. Well, and also so the universe.
Yeah.
Just like we're like
Let's
trying
just
to
keep
fly.
it casual.
We're trying to fly to different cities to meet each other, and it's not working out. And then we stumble upon each other in the same neighborhood at a taco place. So
Yeah.
I love that. And now, after engaging with your book and reading about your dog Blue a little bit, that day has so much more meaning for me, knowing what Blue meant to you. So, wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Really special. So it's interesting because that was like the hardest day of my life. You can see it's like the emotion is immediately present.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's cool. It's really beautiful to know that and then be here together to talk about it.
Do you want to talk more about why that was?
Yeah, sure. Well, it's kind of a spoiler alert for the end of the book, but it's okay because, some people know. But basically, we had a beautiful dog, Blue. He was an Australian Shepherd. And basically from the day we got him, I knew, like, I could feel that he was wild. And it's funny because since, having him, I realized that before we got him, I was obsessed with wolves. It was like all I talked about. And I always would say, like, I want a wolf. Like, I'd love to have a wolf. I just want, like, to live with a wolf. And so when we got Blue, I was like, oh my God, I think I got a wolf in an Australian Shepherd body. And it's like, that's pretty much what Blue was. From day one, he was super wild and just had a lot of behavioral issues, like from the get-go. We got him at 8 weeks. And so, but I immediately loved him. Like, it was such a immediate, like, soul connection. And so we had him, we went through the journey of trying to help him and train him and work with all sorts of trainers. And integrate our lives together. But basically it just became more and more obvious that our lives wouldn't blend, you know? And so we tried to look into options, but as we looked into options of what to do, whether it would be like rehoming him or send him back to the breeder or something that would take care of him, his behaviors got worse and worse and worse. And he ended up, first he attacked our dog, Ollie. We had another mini Aussie a couple times. The last time he did it was pretty bad. Ollie was bleeding. If we didn't get involved, Ollie probably would be dead.
Wow.
Would have been dead. And then the next day he attacked Ferris, my husband. So he basically like turned on the whole family except for me. And so I sat with him and I had this in the morning, early hours of the morning, and I just like had a chat with him. And I looked at him and I was like, what do you want here? Like, what can I do? How can I help you? And it was just very clear that he was like, if you don't kill me, I'm going to hurt you. And I don't want to.
Wow.
So that day was when we had to euthanize him for behavior.
Wow.
Yeah. So it was horrible. It was like, and the chapter that I talk about it is called The Hardest Truth, because it was like the hardest thing I've ever had to do. But also once that truth landed in my body, I knew that there was no other option. Like it had to be done. And it's crazy because since that's happened, I've had, even yesterday, someone contacted me and her cat is sick with bone cancer. And she's like, what do I do? Should I let her go or should I keep her going until she starves and dies? And I'm like, this is the conversation around death that we all have such a hard time with. And with animals especially, we do anything to keep them, whether it's like putting muzzling them and putting them in crates and keeping them with baby gates and, drugging them and all sorts of things. And there's no judgment because there's no right or wrong. But ultimately, sometimes animals, like, they don't have the same relationship with death that we as humans do. We're very conditioned to see death as this horrific, bad, tragic thing that you need to resist and do everything to sustain life. Yeah. And sometimes death is the answer. Right. And that was the hardest truth, but a truth that since walking through that door has taught me incredible amounts about life. So, yeah.
Wow, that's so powerful. And I completely agree with what you're saying here about, you said we humans have a different relationship with death, but I would go even further to say Western culture.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think you would agree with me there because many indigenous cultures and Eastern cultures have quite a different relationship with death where it is welcomed.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that was the thing that for me, the contrast, like, I don't know if you notice on my book cover, it's, like very clearly North America, but then we have the faint outline of the hibiscus flowers because I grew up in Malaysia. So I had the really strong background in Southeast Asia. So I was around, death ceremony, death celebration, my whole childhood. And so
what did that look like?
I mean, like people, when family members of friends of like our Chinese friends or our Malaysian friends or our Indian friends, when their loved ones or friends or family members would die, it wasn't like everyone's dressing in black, everyone's quiet, no one asks questions, you go to a funeral, you don't say anything, you put your head down, you have wine and, pretend like it's not happening. It's like a celebration. People wear color. They, depending on what the culture was, sometimes they would like parade the body kind of around the village. Right. Like the kids would be laughing and happy. It's like, it's colorful. Yeah. It's honored. It's not quiet and hidden. And, like I talk about in the book, when someone, like, we don't see death, right? When we don't see death on our streets. We don't see bodies transported. When someone dies, their body is zipped into a black thick black bag,
right,
and they're transported to a building, a morgue, where they're refrigerated until they're then, buried under the ground in a coffin, embalmed, put makeup on, dressed up, put their jewelry on.
Very clownish.
It's
very strange.
It's really strange.
You're making me think of this one of my favorite films is called Baraka.
Oh, I don't know it.
Oh man, it's got no dialogue, no words. It's all music and just like amazing images from all around the world of ceremony and ritual and song. And there's this one, it's all done with juxtaposition of images. And there's this one scene where it's people at the Ganges lighting, funeral pyres alongside people who are bathing. Yeah. And it's just very regular for bodies to be put into the river and other people are bathing. And we would find that quite horrifically disgusting in the West. And that, again, just goes to show our sort of, I venture to say, distorted relationship with death.
For sure. That's actually how my book ends. The epilogue is a story about Ferris, my husband, and I going to Varanasi and witnessing. So you're right on point there. Yeah. So that was a at first haunting, and then like bewitching and life altering experience, because it went from like, oh my God, this is crazy, to this is beautiful, this is so peaceful. You feel like immediately immersed in the energy of the coexistence of life and death, right?
Totally. I mean, I have an inkling of where the origins of our Western view on death came from. You know, this more like somber, sober, dressed in black, sort of dark experience. But did you, in your research or your readings or all your esoteric studies, did you come across some threads of where that might have begun for our culture?
So I mean, a lot of what I've looked into, especially through my journey of befriending darkness, is getting connected to my ancestry and being really drawn to like Celtic roots and also the Nordic roots. And so when you go far back enough, you realize that kind of the beginning of a religion is when a lot of the distortion and imbalance was created between life and death, and how, or light and dark, and how death ended up, kind of becoming this, I would say okay, so an example is that when someone commits suicide, right, which is such a charged occurrence in our world, the word commit means is related to crime. It's criminal activity, right? So when someone ends their life for whatever reason, it's considered a crime in the West. Right. So it's kind of like this whole relationship that death is a crime. And unless you die by natural causes, then it's not your choice. It's God's choice. Right. That's kind of that religious learning, I guess.
Totally. You're also making me think about Halloween. And how that's been very distorted.
Changed.
Can you give us a little bit of like what you know about that? Because it was a pagan.
Yeah. Well, All Hallows Eve was like the time on the pagan calendar, or the Celtic, like the wheel, when it's traditionally it's like when the veil is at its thinnest. It's when the difference between the living and the dead, the worlds, the realms, there's less of a separation.
Right.
So it was a time of celebrating your ancestors and those who've passed, the loved ones who've passed. And then that tradition kind of got taken and turned into Halloween, right? Which comes from All Hallows Eve. And it went from this like celebration of spirit to creating more of like a fear relationship to spirit. And so now, and when you think about it, a lot of like in the East, in Asia, like in Bali, they have different things outside their doors to keep, the evil spirits out.
Right.
So it's like things like that translated from something that was rooted in culture to something that became like a mainstream entertainment, and then morphed its way into that like dark and light or good and evil sort of duality.
Totally. And looping back to something you said before, you were talking about death and life being, in our minds sometimes synonymous with darkness and light, and that whole distortion. And I love, first of all, that just the theme of your book of like revealed by darkness. So the idea of not turning away from the darkness, but actually going into it, welcoming it, and understanding what gifts are there. And I believe I read somewhere, maybe it was on your Instagram, you called yourself a dark worker. A dark worker. Could you go into that? What do you mean by that? And for somebody who's like, that's terrifying, only light and love, good vibes only, light work only.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Well, when I started to write my book, at first it was just like, I called it like the Dropbox folder of doom. It was just like 100,000 words of
Pain
stuff. Yeah, pain.
I have one of those.
That just reminded me of the girl in Twilight that can like create pain by just saying it.
Right.
Dakota Fanning.
Right.
She's like pain.
Right.
Anyways, moving on. So it started as this big schlop of stuff, pain. And then, I worked with my editor and we started to kind of look at themes, and it was really clear that there was a very consistent theme around light and dark and good and bad. And so when I immersed myself in that, I was like, oh, wow, my whole life has been about darkness and like working with darkness and running away from it and being scared of it. And it's been like the thread of my life.
Right.
So when I realized that, I was like, oh, wow, this is kind of intense. Like this is, like a light bulb popped up in my head. So, with darkness and, that took me into this kind of pilgrimage of meeting my ancestors and starting there and beginning to, because what I was missing as a kid was like roots and support to understand who I was, what was happening, what it was about, how to manage it, and how to embrace it. And so when I started to become more aware of that, it was like I had to go on this journey of meeting my ancestors to discover and find those roots that I had lost, not only literally because our family had moved from England to Canada to Malaysia. So my brother and I were the only ones in our extended family that weren't in England. So literally away from our roots, but then also like the spiritual roots. And what I realized is that when I was in the dark, literally, that was when my ancestors would appear. And that was when I was also most scared. So I had to go through this initiation with darkness by actually going to our family have a ranch in Alberta, and it's like in the Rockies. It's dark. There's no lights. There's no one there. You're by yourself, and it's also really close to Banff, which is on what's it called? An energetic axis point where the energy is really strong. So ever since I was little, I was always really aware that a lot was going on there. So, in the middle of winter, it gets dark really early. So I would just be immersed in darkness for like 15 hours.
Wow.
Yeah. And so I had to meet everything from my childhood that I had run from, because at night as a kid, I was terrified.
Yeah.
My whole childhood never slept, just always aware of everything around me and didn't know what to do with it. So I had to create a new relationship with nighttime and what nighttime connected to. And then, starting to do mediumship and psychic work, darkness is also present, right? Because a lot of the time when you do mediumship, you're working with people who have passed and died. Like ancestor work is death work. Mediumship is death work. So it was like death was basically just like all around me. And so I had to create a new relationship with death, because I had these abilities, but I was terrified of them and what they would do to me, and that I couldn't control them. So the deeper I went, the darker I went, the more I realized this isn't something to be scared of. This is like amazing. This place is so rich, and the deeper I go, the more connected to myself I am. And the more I uncover about what's actually true. And so when I say dark worker, it's like, I mean, the fact that when I would call myself a dark worker, people go, whoa. But when you say light worker, they're like, right. I'm like, well, that's a great starting point. Right. Why are we so scared of the dark? What is it about the word dark? Right. That terrifies everyone and puts everyone up in arms, right? So that's, for me, that's the work of the dark worker, is to represent the dark and to remind us that the dark is not what we have been taught that it is. And we're so scared of it, and that's toxic. It's creating problems in our world on many, many, many levels.
Totally. You're reminding me of something one of my dear friends, Omar, said to me, and I think I've said this on the podcast before, but in a time where I was going through a lot of shadow integrating after a lot of ayahuasca, I felt like I was losing pieces of my mind, and I couldn't really tell who I was or what was going on. And I was afraid of everything, afraid of the feelings inside me, afraid of what I could understand or feel when I looked at people, or the desire to sing certain tones. I was like, where is this coming from? And really wanting to shut all of it down, and waking up in the middle of the night with crazy, vivid dreams. Sometimes they were very cool, and sometimes they were excruciatingly terrifying. And this friend said to me, nothing can hurt you that isn't you. And I went, wow, okay, so this darkness is a part of me. It's a part of me that I'm holding apart from myself, that I'm rejecting. And the rejection, the resistance, is what's making me suffer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and the reason you're rejecting it is because light is being put on it, right? Because shadow is created by light, not by dark, right? There's no shadows at nighttime. The shadows are in the daytime.
Right.
So the only reason we reject these dark parts of us is because we're obsessed with the light, and we've made dark bad. So shadow stuff is created by light. And that's just like a for me. And that's something that I talk about in the book, because whenever we, in the spiritual space or the healing space, whenever we think of darkness, we always just think of shadow work.
Right.
And that's a distortion, because that's actually not what darkness is. That's just what the light perception of darkness is.
Wow.
Right.
Okay, so what's the real dark work then? Because I'm familiar with what it means to go into my shadows, if we're talking like Jungian stuff. But what is the real dark work?
So there's a quote in my book that I have quoted by this wonderful guy, Wendell Berry.
Oh, yeah.
And let me see if I can find it, if I know my book well enough. Okay, so he says... to go in the dark with to go in the dark with a light is to know the light. To know the dark, go without sight, and find that the dark too blooms and sings, and is traveled by dark feet and dark wings. Right? So it's like dark work is about working in the dark without light. Right? So for me, that's essentially what I had to do when I went to the ranch. Yeah. I had to go and sit in the dark and just be there. Yeah. And it's like to not have an agenda, to not have a plan, to not know when you're coming out, right? Because that's very common in what we see, like we talk about dark night of the soul. Right. which is when people get really sideswept, right? Because they don't know when they're going to come out. Something has happened in life that's had them question purpose, question self, all these things. And for me, what I've come to learn is that the reason that happens is because we don't have a relationship with darkness. And so when we meet darkness, we lose ourselves. We get lost. So that's dark for me. Dark work is about learning how to see in the dark, learning how to be in the dark.
So for somebody listening to this who is realizing for the first time they've been shoving away their darkness, but they're a little afraid of where to begin, what would you recommend for them?
So the first thing, I mean, when I think about darkness in terms of experience, the first thing that comes up is nighttime, right? Because it comes every 12 hours. So it's like a pretty reliable way of like having a ritual around building your relationship with darkness. So what I would say is like start bringing your awareness to your relationship to night. Like what happens at nighttime? What's the difference between your relationship in the day and your relationship with yourself in the daytime and your relationship with yourself in the night, right? What do you do at night? What do you do in the day? Can you be in the presence of nighttime without turning on the lights, or lighting a candle, or putting on a night light, or putting on a sleep meditation? Because oftentimes, when you think about darkness and nighttime, it goes with silence, right? Like the city's sleeping, it's quiet. That's like a Samhain, right? That's when the veil is at its thinnest. And we know, and the term was created by the Catholic Church, but the witching hour is, between the hours of the night when everyone's quiet, and that's when spirits are most present. So I would say create a relationship with nighttime. And the easiest thing to do is like right when the sun goes down, instead of immediately turning lights on in your house, which is what we all do, just let the lights stay off for a bit and see what comes up. And in the morning, when you wake up, see if you can wake up before the sun rises and don't turn lights on. And again, what happens? What do you see, right? Because what I've noticed is that we're often like, no, I'm scared of what I'll see, or my anxiety is higher at night, right? And instead of just staying there, pull the thread. Well, why is your anxiety higher at night? Why can't you sleep? Why are you, why do you sleep with the porch light on? That's another thing. Like we leave our lights on for safety, right? So that people think that someone's home. But where did that get created? Why are we doing that?
Right. And what just came to mind when you're saying all this is we have a light switch. There's no darkness switch. Because darkness is just there. Do you know what I mean? Exactly. And it's like we need to turn on the light to override the darkness.
Totally. It's really wild. Like when you start to observe this, it's just, for me, I'm like a obsessed student of darkness. Like my partner is like, oh gosh, Chloe, like, can we just give it a break? I'm like, did you notice that? He's like,
It's true though. I mean, conceptually, what if we were born into a world where, it wasn't the sun that we were worshiping or whatever. And it was actually like we wanted all the lights off all the time. It's just because this is the way that we've been entrained, that we accept this. So, and it is my personal belief that as a collective, we are evolving toward unity. So it becomes necessary to dissolve our preferences, our strong preferences on either side of duality.
For sure.
I love the part of the book, it's toward the beginning where you talk about the ranch and even the history of the ranch. If you will go there, I would love that. And then you give this vignette that's almost like a scary movie of one of your first nights at the ranch, and you're just basically trying to busy yourself and you're filling up the bathtub. And then there's this classic, like you hear a bump in the night sort of moment. Would you be willing to retell a little bit of that story?
Yeah, sure. So we got this place because we were living in Malaysia, and my mom wanted to have a place that we could come home to in the summers because I was obsessed with Canada since I was born in Canada. So we'd be in Malaysia and I'd be like, I'm from Canada. I want to go back to Canada. So my mom was like, okay, we need to get a home here for our family to come home to. So she ended up finding this amazing kind of like communal property that is literally like a old Western town. It's this guy, he calls himself the sheriff, and he used to box with Muhammad Ali. He's a very eccentric, strange man who just like he's a millionaire or something, right? So he had this idea of building this old Western town.
Almost like a movie set is what I picture.
And actually it is like the Jonas Brothers, one of their latest films or music videos was filmed on the property. It's so random.
Wow.
There's like a picture of them on one of my mom's horses. And like Shania Twain's been there. Jackie Chan's been there. I think like part of Legends of the Fall was filmed around there.
Wow.
Super random. Anyways, so yeah, this place was like my wonderland. But as soon as when I became a little bit older, I became really aware of the fact that like there's a lot more beings on this land than just the owners of the homes.
Right.
Because obviously it was an extremely, it's Calgary, it's oil town, very whitewashed community, but there's also this presence of like, oh, this land holds pain.
Right.
This land,
kind of stolen land.
This is stolen land.
Yeah.
And there's one of the beings that I first witnessed, and they were all in my bedroom. So my bedroom was in the basement, and anyone, even friends that weren't sensitive, they couldn't sleep in my bedroom because they were like, I can't be in this room. Like, it's so intense. So I basically never slept, but there was one that we had like a chief, like a indigenous chief that was there, and he was like pissed all the time, and I was always way too scared to acknowledge him. But
how old were you when you were starting to see all this?
So I was really aware of the energy of this when we got it. I was 12, but at that time I would say that I was occupied with my teenage self of like going horse riding and boys and stuff. So I wasn't very like open to it as much as when I became like 16. That was when things became more obvious, when I was like not able to sleep there, not as distracted. And then it just got louder and louder and louder. And then in my 20s, it was like I couldn't sleep in the basement. I had to sleep in my brother's room, or I would sleep upstairs.
Your room had been in the basement?
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah, of course, right?
Where the darkness is.
Yeah. And it's like got like a tiny little square window. And, my mom is spiritual too. So she cleared it like millions of times.
Right.
And she's like, no, it's fine, Chloe. Don't worry. I've cleared it. She's from Windsor, England. And I'm like, Mom, it's not clear. Like, this guy is not leaving. And it was this one chief. And he stayed in the corner and he never left. He was always there. And I think he's still there. I haven't been in a while.
Wow.
So yeah. So that time that I went, I had gotten the message, the guidance to go. It was just popped into my head. And this was when I had just started doing my psychic work, but I wasn't, full time, and I hadn't fully embraced it. So it was like, okay, I'm going to go to the ranch in February for 2 weeks by myself. Great. Right. So I get there. And the moment I get there, I was actually with my friend who was living in Calgary, and we walked in the door, and it was like I closed the door and I immediately felt that there were about 40 spirits at the front door, like a line of them. And I didn't want to say anything to her because I didn't want to freak her out. She was the one that couldn't sleep in the bedroom.
Right.
And so I just was quiet about it and just let it be. So she left on that first night. And when she left, I remember watching her car leave, and I was just like, oh my God. Like as I watched it disappear, this like red Toyota, I just, the fear and like the sun is setting as her car's leaving. And I'm like, oh no.
This is definitely the start of a scary movie, a horror movie.
This is like, okay, I'm in a haunted house and she's left and I'm alone. So I walked back to the house and, you know, tried to do my best to keep things light. So I kept the lights on, I put on music. I was like, okay, I'm going to run a bath and like light candles and have a great time. And Ollie, my little mini Aussie, was there. And I'm like, come on, Ollie, let's, you know, do these things. And keeping everything good. And then all of a sudden, bang, downstairs in the basement, go downstairs.
Classic.
Yeah. And there was a picture that I had never seen before, a black and white picture framed face down of my mom's grandma and her sisters and mom and dad. I'd never seen this picture
What was
before.
your demeanor like, though, when you were walking down the stairs? You weren't
Terrified.
like, oh, let me go see what's in the basement.
Terrified.
Yeah.
Terrified. This wasn't my first rodeo with spirits, but this was my first time alone at a ranch for 2 weeks in February. And so I was terrified.
Yeah.
But I used to do this as a kid. I write about this in the book. I would like talk out loud. Oh, what's in the basement? It's fine. I'm just going to go look, like out loud, to just like have people know that I'm there so that they'll leave and pretend like I'm not scared. But in my head, I'm like, spirits hear my thoughts. They know that I'm scared. It doesn't matter what I'm saying.
Right.
So so I pick up the painting and I was like, oh, Ollie, this is so weird. How did this get here? And Ollie's just looking at me like, this, you're like crazy.
Silly woman.
Yeah. He's like, Mom, there's like 30 people in here.
Yeah.
So I put it in the boiler room, because that's like the room that you don't go in.
To the boiler room.
And the boiler room is like the room that you open the door and like run in and run out. It's terrifying. It's a scary place.
Yeah, as boiler rooms are.
Yeah, it's like Macaulay Culkin from Home Alone sort of situation. So start walking upstairs, and then all of a sudden I hear noise up in my mom's room, which is at the top floor. And at this point, I run up the stairs and I go and realize that now the sink tap is on, and the sink tap was not on before. So
okay.
Yeah. At this point I was like, oh God. Yeah. This is happening. Yeah.
Okay.
So that, it just continued. It was 2 weeks of that. And at this point I didn't know how to manage my fear. My fear was rampant. Like it ran the show. And so I would be tormented by a lot of these spirits, because they weren't all my ancestors. Some were, more I guess taking advantage of the fact that I was there and
like
trying to.
Keepers of the land, or like had been in that house, or
keepers of the land, people that have died. There was a little girl there who would wake me up in the middle of the night. And children's spirits tend to be a little bit more cheeky, just like kids in real life. So she was a little bit, she would like be kind of pushy. It was 2 weeks of intensity.
How would she wake you up?
She would push me or like shake me, or, I've had this since I was little, where spirits will physically mess with me
in your sleep.
Yeah, in my sleep.
I have things of this nature occur too. Yeah. And the reason I'm poking more at this, because my feeling is that we're not the only ones. No. And there are people listening to this that are going, oh yeah, like sleep paralysis. I've felt that. I've woken up. I've felt like things were pinning me down. Yeah. Or I've been in a dream, but I was lucid and my whole body felt like it had disappeared, or it was sand, or it was heavy, or energies were moving through me in a way that I can't describe. Or I quite often have things where it feels like dark sexual energy that will aggress me in my sleep. Yeah. I've had that too. I'm curious, what you make of all that for somebody who's listening going, oh my gosh, that happens to me too. Yeah. And how to navigate that energetically. So, it doesn't happen to me anymore because I am not scared, right? That's the key. Yeah. Because when you're scared,
your fear is just building that energy and also attracting in that energy, right? It's like attracts like, or the universal law of correspondence. So my fear at that time was so loud that like my heart was thumping out of my body. I was sweating all night long. My thoughts just, I would try to watch, I just put on Friends the whole night long just to try to like lighten things up. But my fear was so loud that I was basically just like a punching board for a punching bag for them to do whatever they wanted. And that was very much what it was like for me as a kid too, because I was so sensitive. They can see it. They know it. They know that I can see them and feel them and hear them. But I also had no boundaries. I had no, I guess, rules or restrictions. And I didn't know how to hold my ground. So, right. It was just like, oh, she can see us. Great. Let's like,
most kids don't. Like, we're all sensitive to some degree as kids, and that's why we're so easily terrified.
Yeah.
So my next question is, how did you learn these boundaries? Did you work with shamanic mentorship? Did you develop different tools? And my guess is yes. And also, are there prayers that you started to say? Are there assertions, boundaries you started to set around when these things could interact with you, or how?
Yeah. So yes to all things, and various levels, and, over time, different things for different situations. The biggest thing though is working with my fear. So first I had to realize that, just like if this was humans doing this, like I have to learn to use my voice and speak up and, hold my ground. It's very similar to as a girl, we got robbed in Malaysia when I was little.
Oh yeah.
And
go into this story. It's interesting.
So so the guy, because my brother and I were on the ground floor, my mom was on the first floor. And this guy crowbarred the window, got into our ground floor. My brother had his friend Jesse over, and so they had locked their bedroom door.
So you guys were home.
We were all home.
And like living in Malaysia was kind of savage, as I gathered from your book. And you had like bars on your windows.
Yeah.
So this guy,
he crowbarred the windows, got in, I could sneak through those bars. In fact, I did every night to go out clubbing.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the thing. And I would wear flip-flops and throw my flip-flops through the bar, and then climb down the white wall. And then in the morning I'd realize that my black footprints were on the white wall. I'm oh, mom's going to know that but she knew anyways. So yeah, he crowbarred the window, but my bedroom door was open, so he was in my bedroom. I had one of those IKEA bunk beds where you have the top bunk and then the bottom is open. So I was in the top bunk, and I had only just started to fall asleep because I didn't sleep much.
How old were you again?
At this point, I was probably 14.
Okay.
14.
This is my worst nightmare occurring right now.
Yes.
Just like what you're describing.
Yeah, it was kind of intense.
Okay.
So I heard someone in the room ruffling around, and I immediately thought, this is Sam's friend, Jesse, who was like my brother, who just so happens to be from Texas. And I was so I was going to say, Jesse, what are you doing? And I did have a small crush on him at the time. So I was why are you in my room?
Yeah.
And so, but I looked closer through the little gap in the bar of my bunk bed, or the, wooden post. And I realized oh my God, that's not Jesse. And immediately,
oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I feel the terror of that in my body right now.
And this is after already having a terrible relationship with sleep, constantly seeing and feeling things in my room. And now there's physically something in my room. It's a man.
Were you sure at that point that it was physical because of you had been seeing all these things?
Yeah. It was very clear that this was a man.
Right.
Because everything else that I had seen it was like the silhouettes or like entities or different sort of like, you can tell the different. This guy was like fully solid.
This is so ballsy to break into someone's home while
this is very Malaysia.
Wow.
I mean, at this point, we had so many. This was during a time where there were so many break-ins. I mean, really, really horrific things happened. Like two of the kids. This is like really horrific, but 2 boys in our school, their parents went out for dinner. They were at home, stayed home with their maid, and the security guard, like the guard, came into the house and tied the maid up and beheaded the children. Like,
oh my gosh.
These are some of the things that like would happen.
Wow.
So, yeah. I mean,
why do you believe that is? Just because of like the
I think the
socioeconomic
poverty,
discrepancy,
mental health issues.
Yeah.
In Asia, I think mental health is not like any sort of, like schizophrenia or any of these things are at that time, especially, weren't probably taken care of or helped. And then there's like the trauma of the different people, what they go through, what they experience. I mean, our driver, his son was eaten by a snake, literally.
Oh my gosh.
So like the things that the people experience is, it's like when you learn about people's stories and then you're just like, wow, the difference in our experiences are crazy.
Okay.
So we're back to
back in the
robber.
room,
Yes.
you see the robber between the bars of your bunk bed.
Yes.
Fear is ripping and coursing through your entire body. And you do what?
So at this point, this is what I did every time. I would pull the covers. So I saw him and I was like, okay, I'm just going to pull the covers over my head and pretend that he's not here. I pretty much was just like, okay, I'm just going to pretend like he's a spirit and hopefully he leaves. So I did that and I fell asleep, which is crazy. So I wake up, I don't know how many more minutes or what have you later, to my mom yelling bloody murder. Get out of my house. So basically she heard the same sort of like noise and she looked down, also thought it was Jesse. We had like a spiral staircase so she could like look down and the guy looked right back up at her and my dad wasn't home because my dad was never home. And so mama energy popped in and she yelled and he booked it out. What's interesting is that after we, the police came, we saw there was all this burnt toilet paper in our yard.
What?
And one of the police officers was Chinese and he said that this is something that it's like they put a spell on you guys to fall asleep. I fell asleep.
Oh my gosh.
So they did that. And what's even crazier is that a couple days later, my brother and I were playing cops and robbers. Our apartment was like right backed to a massive jungle. And we had a huge mountain on the side. So we were like kind of climbing up and around the mountain. And we came across this massive campsite, like an abandoned campsite. And I found my stuff there. So basically these guys had been camping and because we got to the top of the mountain and we realized you can see everything from our house. You can see into every window. Whoa. So they had basically been spying on us and waiting when to come.
So you found this abandoned campsite. Like, paint a picture for me. What did it look like? Like, what was there? It's just
like, you could see there were like pieces of burnt wood, like remnants of tents, like plastic Coca-Cola bottles and 7 Up and 100 Plus, which is an isotonic Malaysian drink. And I found like my bracelet and I found like some of because they had because I didn't have a lot of good stuff in my room. They were like, man, we really like didn't get a good, we didn't choose the right place. We should have gone upstairs. Yeah. So there were like pieces from my journal, like just all sorts of random things.
Oh, that's so invasive.
Yeah.
It's so invasive.
Yeah.
Man, I you're making me think of when I lived in Australia for a time. I was out at a brunch on a Sunday in the middle of the afternoon with some friends, and I lived in like this community house with like 4 or 5 other people I worked with at a restaurant at the time. I was probably like 20 or 21 at this point. And we were having this barbecue middle of the afternoon, and then all of a sudden somebody in our group got a text, and they were like, something really horrible has happened. And we were all like, what? And it was like, we have to go now back to the house. And we got back to the house. Cops were there. The door was open. And our other roommates were there. And they were like, there's been a break-in. And they kind of looked at me and they're like, your room's the worst.
Oh, gosh.
And I was like, oh, no, because I had just moved into that house like 2 weeks before.
Wow.
I had to get the help of a lawyer to get me out of a really bad living situation that I was in previously. So the living with friends felt like the answer to a prayer.
Right.
And then this brick dropped on my head shortly after. Walked into my room. My laptop was gone. I was in school at the time, like all the essays, all the papers, all my writings from, it was like a 5-year-old laptop.
Right.
So at least.
It's a lot of a lot of pain.
Yeah. Yeah. All my poems, everything. And laptop was gone. 2-day-old iPod that I had just gotten with the plastic still on was gone. My camera with all my photos I had taken from my trip. And they even stole, I remember they took my college athletic bag from under the bed to steal the electronics in. And then the most disturbing part was, you know, a lot of people keep like cash or jewelry in their underwear drawer. I didn't, but my underwear drawer had been dumped out onto the bed. And so it was like having all your intimate things spread all over. And then there were also footprints on the bed, like dirty shoes. Like they were standing and just rummaging around. Rummaging. It was just the grossest feeling. And I remember this sense of safety that I had just being taken, permanently burst. Like I've never been so naive ever again. And so I'm curious for you, if you want to close any loops on that story, and then also go into the theme of safety, because I know it is a theme in your book as well.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the safety was such a big theme because it's so connected to what we were talking about around darkness, right? Because in order for me to learn how to manage what I allow in and what I don't allow in, I had to work with my concept of safety and my beliefs around safety.
Right.
And ever since I was a little girl, I was always very aware that my mom didn't feel safe. It was not only something that was verbally communicated often, but also just very clearly, energetically and emotionally. So because of that, I didn't feel safe, right? So, and I don't, it's like, what came first, the chicken or the egg? Because, this strong focus on not being safe created a reality where we were very often in situations that didn't feel safe, or where our safety was being tested, like being robbed by a man when my dad wasn't home. So, and various other similar and different things occurred. And then, not only that, but then I also really, being a expat white girl in Southeast Asia, I tested the limits of my freedom and my safety on a daily basis, because ultimately it was like, well, I don't know what is safe and I don't know what isn't safe. So I'm going to find that line on my own. So that in itself was a journey. And then it was also like, from what I was kind of aware of was that my mom saw safety as my not being safe as connected to my dad not being around. So I learned men are your source of safety. So I started to look for safety in men. But I also would choose men that didn't end up being safe, right? So that I had to go on that whole journey of like testing that and finding those lines. And with darkness, I had to discover my own source of safety within myself, which was a long journey. It's not an easy switch. It's something that I had to really work on daily. And I think now looking back, I see that it's all so connected, and that working through all of these pieces helped me to become empowered to to do the work that I do. Because now when something comes knocking at my door or shows up in my bedroom at night, I know it doesn't stay. It's out of there pretty quickly, because I'm not scared of it. And I'm also I'm not down. Right. So you asked earlier kind of what are some of the things that I do. When I started working with mediumship and building my mediumship specifically, I worked with a woman called Bonnie Worth. She's lovely. She's from Alberta. And she taught me to basically write out my rules and boundaries and to leave it out for spirit to read. So that was really actually super helpful, because it allowed me to communicate externally and verbally what is okay and what isn't. And then also like have that experience of knowing that they're reading it. Right.
So it reminds me of almost like when we're a kid and we leave a note for Santa. Yeah. That's exactly what it reminds me of.
Totally.
So what kind of things were on this list of rules?
So it would say like, my bedroom and my bathroom are off limits. Do not come in here. Don't disturb me in here. Sleep time is valuable. I'm not available when I'm sleeping. If you have a loved one you want to connect to, get them to book a session with me. Do not come to me beforehand.
Ooh.
If a loved one books a session with me, show up with your loved one at the time, not before. Don't touch my body. My body's off limits. Unless we're in a session, and then, because I can be very clairsentient. So clairsentience is one of the ways that I receive messages, but it's like, it has to come through the lens and the space of healing and support. So, it had to be really strict. And that by doing that, it allowed me to find my voice and to find my sense of power, right? Like, this is okay. This is not okay.
Yeah.
And to be okay with doing that, because I think that what I felt before was like this sense of duty, that because I knew, was aware of spirits, that I owed them something, and that if they came to me, I had to be available and help them. Otherwise I was a bad person, not doing my job, being selfish,
Totally.
And it's funny because I knew not to do that with humans, but for some reason I wasn't doing that with spirits.
Right.
And so I had to learn, like, no, it's the same thing.
Right.
They have to have rules too, right? Why would you let a spirit walk through your front door in the middle of the night, but you won't let a human? You know?
Totally. Wow. There's so much here. I appreciate this. And you're reminding me of a conversation I had with my friend Brandy. It was during a time where I guess I was in the darkness a little bit. I often go to my parents' property in Canada as well, but on the East Coast. And
I think I know that property from stories.
Yeah. It's out in the middle of nowhere.
It's like a retreat space, right?
Yeah. But we often have no retreats there, which is a really nice time to just be by oneself.
Yeah.
And when I'm there, I stay in a little 4-wall cabin with only a bed and a writing desk.
Wow.
And there's electricity, but in that little cabin, there's no running water. So I go to the bathroom outside, or I go to the main house to go to the bathroom, and there's just a writing desk, a bed, and an altar.
Wow.
And there's no light pollution, because it's like 45 minutes outside of the nearest town. Like, to drive to get groceries, you have to drive 45 minutes.
Wow.
To get gas, it's at least 20, Now
when I hear of places like that, I'm like, can I go?
Right. And even when you were telling me about being in the darkness, I recalled many times when I would walk from the lodge down the long driveway down to my cabin at night with no light, and sometimes barefoot too. And I would just allow the sensory experience to envelope me and just observe any of the thoughts. It's like, oh, what was that noise?
Yeah.
Okay, well, what if it was that? And okay, what would I do? How would I breathe? How would my presence be? And when we talk about confronting the darkness, this is something I've been rehearsing, as I have also had a lot of run-ins with darkness. And I was having a conversation with my mother, who's also an intuitive person, human, amazing woman. And we were talking about darkness and the agreements that we make with energies that maybe come from a different density, we'll say.
Right.
And I was sharing with her almost the exact same thing that you're sharing here, which is it's important not to speak to these things with the vibration of fear inside of us, which is a challenging thing to do.
It is.
How do you greet something and yet not welcome it? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And not push it away so fiercely that you're actually unknowingly magnetizing it toward yourself.
Yeah.
It's like
energy management 101.
It's a nuance.
It's
a nuance. And so, I was taught from a very young age to say prayers along the lines of, I surround myself with light. Anything that is not in the alignment with my highest good and the highest good of all humankind and all beings on earth is not welcome here. But when it's said very pragmatically, not like, get away from me, you scary things. And it's not easy to train ourselves in that direction. I want to share a quick story of my own.
Yeah.
When I was 9, my parents split up and we went from living on a beautiful piece of farmland, like 30 or 60 acres of farmland in upstate New York, in a designer home, 4 little kids running around barefoot, living off the land and just playing. And I also often felt like there were magical, ethereal things around me. I would talk to the fairies.
I was going to say the fairies.
I felt like I could see leprechauns and was very imaginative child and very in tune and very emotional. And then my parents both had to go bankrupt and they were in a 3-year custody battle over us.
Oh, wow.
And during that time, we downsized from this giant property with like a 4-car garage and all the privilege and the beautiful bubble of childhood just got burst. And we ended up moving first into this tiny 2-bedroom apartment with my mom and my 3 brothers. And my 3 brothers and I shared the master bedroom. It was like 4 little beds in one room. We had to leave our school because we went to an expensive private school that my parents could no longer pay for because they were both going bankrupt because of the legal fees. And I was homeschooling at the time. We stayed there for a summer. And then my mom was like, this isn't enough space. And she moved us out to a tiny ranch house not far away, just into the country. And we had gotten a really good deal on this house. And I didn't know why, because you're not privy to that information as a child.
Yeah.
But I plunged into this period of intense darkness. And at the time, this is so funny that I'm remembering this. At the time, I was really obsessed with Nancy Drew mystery games.
Oh, nice.
But I would play them and I would scare myself.
Right.
Like I would get scared in these games, and I felt like my psyche was just ebbing and flowing into these strange places, and plus all the emotional stuff going on with my parents. Well, at the time, I developed extreme intestinal parasites. And when I say extreme, I mean extreme, candida, just overgrowth. And it was so bad that when I took bowel movements, I could see white worms.
Wow.
In my stool. And I'm like 10 or 11 years old. Every time.
Wow.
Like a lot. Wild, visible to the naked eye.
Wow.
And so my mom would put oregano oil on my bed on my stomach every night. And then my sheets would, I'd roll around and everything would smell like oregano. It was just the oil would actually kill the parasites, you know, from the inside out. And so I'd get this extreme itching and burning on my stomach.
Yeah.
And I couldn't sleep because there were literally worms dying and having Herxheimer reactions inside of me from the oregano oil. So I was tormented. Yeah. I was tormented by these parasites, which were physical, but also energetic. And I could never sleep. And I always felt like there were dark things around me, and I had all these nightmares. Years later, when we moved out of that house, I was told that the house, we got it cheaply because the man who lived there before committed suicide. Originally, my mom told us that it was in the bathroom, but it turned out he had shot himself in my room. And I was just a deep feeler, a deep seer at that time, and did not know how to protect myself from negative energies. So I resonate so deeply with your story, and I don't think enough people talk about these things. We often consider them pretty airy-fairy or ephemeral or ethereal or imaginative, and I want to just underscore here, if these things are happening to you, you know, maybe just pay attention and stay curious.
Yeah. And all, you know, I also feel that even how we do, you know, when we look at spirits and energies, we do that judgment scheme of like good and bad, positive and negative, benevolent and malevolent, you know, like the ways that we describe things. And I just think that it's also like, those are also part of where the fear comes from. So we really have to work with our fear and the narrative that we tell about the unseen world, right? Because that's what deepens the fear and has us less in our power, so that we can actually dictate our terms and live like happily and coexisting. You know, it's like we like love tigers, right? But then when a tiger kills a baby deer, all of a sudden it's like the tiger's vicious. You know what I mean? And it's like the tiger is doing what what tigers do. Why are they vicious? Or we call tigers like savage, right? Or like whenever we, you know, I talk about this where there's like a wildlife photographer I follow on Instagram, and he had a video of a panther in South America killing like a panther killing a baby antelope. And I looked at the comments, and one of the people said like, how could you just watch it happen? Why didn't you go and save it? You know? And I don't know if someone wrote back, but I immediately was like, this is what I'm talking about. Because what happened if the photographer, let's say the photographer went in and saved the baby antelope, then the panther dies. Which one's better?
Right.
You know? So it's like how we describe the things that occur in our world. And this is like really, for me, like Nordic mythology and Celtic mythology and the roots of a lot of our ancestors that a lot of the West has forgotten. There's so much there that allows us to become more present to those judgments and where they come from. Because when you look at, like for instance, I talk about in the book about Angerboda, who is the shape-shifting she-wolf who falls in love with Loki, who's the trickster. Everyone knows who Loki is usually. And he's the god, and she's a giant, and she's seen as like evil and dark and ugly. And she gives birth to 3 monsters. She gives birth to Fenrir the wolf, Jormungand the death-eating serpent, and Hela, who's the keeper of hell, right? And they're her children, and they're seen as monsters, and the gods want to kill them because she brought monsters into the world, so they want to kill her and them. Right? It's like this interesting story that has us look at why what we call evil, bad, negative. It's like, well, what is it? What is it though? Is it really evil? Is it really bad? Where's that judgment coming from? Are we light and they're dark?
Right.
You know, it's
totally.
like,
it's that lack of unity again.
Yeah.
It's strong preferences.
Yeah.
It's preferences that we have renamed truth.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
It's our attachments to things being a certain way that we are saying this is right and this is wrong.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Immediately what I thought of when you mentioned this person, and no judgment with this, but what comes up for me when you mention this person on Instagram that says, why didn't you interject? Immediately I heard control.
Yeah.
Like this person is trying to control nature.
Yeah.
Right? As are we.
Always.
And this is why we can't look death in the face. It's because it's too confronting. It forces us to look in the mirror and strip away all the falsehoods that we've built our identity on. And that, as you know, is terrifying.
Yeah. And it's death. That's what death does, isn't it? And then the irony is that we dress death up in makeup and nice clothes to pretend that death is still life, but it doesn't matter.
And inject it with formaldehyde.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the deaths, death is inescapable, right? And it's unknown. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
completely
so interesting.
And death has so many teachings. I wish we could all just get in touch with the tenderness we feel around it and confront that fear, welcome it in, and recognize that once you come to terms with death as not a scary thing to be kept separate from and to ignore, then death becomes the gift that is life, because we open our eyes to the fact that, yes, inevitably someday I will die, and therefore every day that I'm alive is a gift. But until we embrace that, we're on this hamster wheel of trying on different masks to avoid the unavoidable.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's really when you take a step outside of it and you look at it. And I do that. I loved anthropology in high school. I was like obsessed with it. I always do that. I'm like observing how we do things. And I'm like, that is absurd. Like that makes actually zero sense.
Right. So, and you have such a good barometer for this, given that you spent so many time just kind of dabbling amongst a lot of cultures and between worlds, in your book, as you say. But I'm thinking of one particular moment you share in your book about witnessing a pilgrimage of sorts in Malaysia. And it was like a festival of, there was piercings, or can you talk about that moment?
Yeah, it's so funny. I'm like, the name of it has left my mind right now, which is very strange. But yeah, so it's a Hindu celebration, and it happens every year in January. And basically it's, there's a place in Kuala Lumpur called Batu Caves, and it's a natural caves that are actually like a Hindu temple. But it's a place where, it's open to tourists, and you climb up like something like 300 stairs. There's macaque monkeys everywhere, which aren't to be mistaken as friendly, because they are aggressive and they will mess with you.
Yeah.
And so, but on this, I wish I could remember the name of it, but on this day, it's something that we were not like, we didn't go to, we never went to. I went once with friends, but our family never went to, because it is it's pretty intense to watch, especially for kids. And I remember my mom.
Graphic.
It's very graphic. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so basically what they do is they go into a trance state where it's all about honoring one of the gods, and they impale their bodies with hooks, and they basically carry like massive platforms with flowers and adornments and gold and all these things, and they pull them up with the hooks as if they're like animals, right? Kind of. Yeah. And they pull it up the stairs, the 300 and so stairs to the top of the caves. And it's this festival of honoring, of sacrifice, right? To, the way that I saw it was that they were dressing, showing the world their sins, or the things that they were releasing or letting go of.
Yeah.
So, it's like,
What was the mood like on those
Intense. The energy is thick. There's a lot of it's a mixture, because you have the onlookers who are no doubt judging,
right,
including myself, because you're like, what are they doing?
Yeah.
This is crazy. This is wild. How are they doing this? That looks painful. And that, you know, their faces, they're in a trance, like their eyes are like open and focused. There's lots of colors, but at the same time, it's, you know, it was very much like Varanasi, watching the cremations. It's like these extreme practices are occurring that seem extreme, that force you to question things. Yeah. Life and wonder, right? And seeing things and this reminds me of like how it's again that sort of conversation of savage. Like colonizers from Europe came to North America and called people here savage because they were doing things that were different to what they're used to, right? And so that is very much kind of what happens a lot of the time when you see things. Like I know that when someone goes to India, to Varanasi, no doubt some of the judgment in their mind, if they've never witnessed cremation while someone's bathing naked in the river, is like, this is animalistic or wild, and you know, there's like
uncivilized
vultures, uncivilized, exactly. So that was kind of the energy that was present that day. It's like, you're there to be entertained, but you're also like bewildered, you know, asking questions. But then there's also people who are like very honoring and really present to the beauty of it. It's just everything. Yeah. And that's like Asia. Asia is like, everything is there all the time. Yeah. You're not just going to see one thing. You're going to see it all dancing together all at once.
Right. That seems more real to me, actually.
Same.
You know, things are just happening. Yeah. Things are happening. That's it. Like without judgment, you know, without polarity, life is happening. Yeah. And the more we can just witness that and be in a state of non-attachment, which is not to be confused with detachment, as in not caring, right? But just observing without getting pulled by the emotional swells. I think that is an incredibly profound way to live. So much is coming up from this. When you're
it's called Taipusam, by the way.
Taipusam, you nailed it.
And I got it. And there is one other thing, because I think about this often, is like, we all have, you know, it's again that experience of like, we see something outside of us and we go, oh my God. And then when we are home by ourselves, we do these things. We do things that are wild and savage too. Yes. And it reminds me of this time that Ferris, my partner, and I were in Hong Kong. No, not Hong Kong. We were in Ho Chi Minh City. You know, we're walking around the streets in one of the districts, and there was this guy, you know, very much like Ho Chi Minh City style. He's just like sitting on the corner of the street next to a pho place or a pho place stall. And he's got like tweezers and like a nail clipper, and he's just like clipping his toenails and like, you know, tweezing like hair from his face. Yeah. Just in the middle of life, grooming himself. Yeah. And I remember, and Ferris was like, oh my God, that's so gross. And I was like, listen, I get it. But I was also like, but you know, you do that, babe, in the bathroom. Just because not everyone's watching doesn't mean that you don't do that. Right.
Yeah. And you bring up a good point. I was actually thinking this. If, you know, people from another culture who would otherwise never have the privilege of coming to America, someone gifted them with a ticket to America, what things would they say were absolutely savage? Think about coming here and seeing a bunch of, you know, like, I don't want to be judgmental, but just like all the distortions women that make to their body that aren't happening in some cultures, or all our little weird rituals and how our weddings are, you know, what we spend money on.
Just like everyone lining up in front of a cafe, you know, with their dogs on leashes.
Totally.
Everyone's dressed the same, probably.
Totally. And they'd be like, this is so obscure.
Yeah.
It's crazy how things become normalized no matter where you live or what you do. I'm thinking of living in New York City and just the amount of things that you see walking down the sidewalk, and how at first when I moved there, I was just aghast with, you know, because I'd moved from Canada.
Right.
And it was like, I lived in a pretty small white town in Canada.
Right.
Where usually one person's parents out of every friend that you knew had a government job.
Right.
Being that it was the capital of that province. And then I moved to New York, and the city is just alive with the wild and the weird and business and fashion and everything. And I just started to I was just shocked by what I saw. And I remember how after a few years of living there, seeing people crying on their cell phone on the street became a regular occurrence.
Right.
Just people having full-on mental breakdowns, where if that had happened in my small town in Canada, there would have been 10 people that stopped to be like, what is wrong? How do we support this person?
Right.
But in a city like New York,
everyone's busy.
Yeah. And I became one of those people that was busy, and I was swept into the current of what it meant to live that life. And I think it's a really great point for anybody to consider in their lives, or have a little self-reflection on, what are the cultural things or the environmental things in my life that have become so normalized that, you know, if an alien were to pop into my experience right now, they would think, wow, that's absurd. Why are they doing that? I thought of that when I was thinking of Halloween once. I remember driving by and seeing a bunch of pumpkins carved.
Yeah.
And I thought, if an interstellar being came, they'd be like, what? Okay, so these people have this ritual where they make these toothy grins on some fruit that grows.
Yeah.
Like, what? If you think about it, if you really think about it.
That's one of my favorite pastimes is to do that. And to bring it back to the theme of darkness, it's the when you really start to work with darkness, you see how anything that's different to us, we just put it into the space. We put it into the box of darkness.
Right. But Pandora's box.
We put it into Pandora's box, right? Yeah. But then what we realize is that when you go into the understanding of like mirror and that unity, that we're not seeing anything that doesn't in some way represent something that's within us, right? Mm-hmm. There's, it's like when we hear that someone's killed themselves, ultimately I would almost go as far to say that everyone has at some point in their life, even if it's for a single millisecond, considered ending their life, right? Yeah. So it's like, what are you putting in your Pandora's box? Mm. And what happens if you begin to open that box up? Because how is it impacting you and the way you're existing in your life by putting all this stuff into that box, right? Okay,
I love this. I love what we've just gotten into here. I talk about Pandora's box. In fact, Pandora's box and the story of it is part of my book that I'm writing right now. But I wondered if you know that story enough to give people a little bit of a background. If they've never heard the story of Pandora and the concept, could we talk about that?
I mean, I'll be honest. I used to know it. Mm-hmm. I don't know it enough to tell it. So although, I feel like it would be a good idea for you to tell it, considering it's in your book.
Well, yes, but it's admittedly not well researched on it. But what I know is Pandora was given this box, I believe, as like a wedding gift. Yeah. And it reminds me of the story of Adam and Eve a little bit with, the apple that Eve is told not to eat. Yeah. And then she eats it.
I talk about this in the book.
Do you? Yeah. So the idea with Pandora, it's the same. She's given this box and told not to open it. Right. And of course, what does she do being a perfectly imperfect, flawed human being? Right. When curiosity gets the best of her.
Especially as she's a woman.
And she's a woman.
So you can't trust women, right?
Of course.
That's like Eve is the one who decides to take the apple, right?
And because of Eve, humanity falls away from God, right? Is the undertone of that story. So Pandora opens this box, and out from it flies the most horrid, putrid, desolate, violent, disgusting, murky evil that you can ever imagine. Every evil intention, thought, crime, abuse pours out into the world, and she tries to slam the box shut. And alas, she cannot put the darkness back from whence it came, and it leaks out into the world. And so there's a couple of different interpretations of this myth of Pandora. One would be, I would be so bold as to say some religions might choose to view this story as a don't open up the darkness because you can't put it back.
Right.
Others might view it as darkness is a part of humanity and it needs to be embraced. Yeah. But I'm curious how you feel about the myth of Pandora.
I mean, for me, I would say that it goes back to that conversation of what we've called these things putrid, evil,
right?
Monstrous. So before we called them those things, what were they?
Yes.
Right. I work with the runes a lot, and a lot of the ways that people learn about the runes is told through a more patriarchal perspective, where Odin, the god, the almighty Odin, he reaches into a well and grabs all the runes and pulls them out. And so Odin is the one who discovers the runes. And so a lot of literature out there that works with the runes and teaches about the runes tells it from that perspective. And also the sets of runes are oftentimes missing the giants, which are 7 other runes. So when you go into that story, again, it's a story, right? And it's kind of like every story is told from a perspective. So whenever you read a story, and this is something that I do a lot, which is why at the end of every chapter of my book, I ask questions, because it's always I loved that. It's like, I'm telling a story, but I want you to ask yourself, like, what does this mean to you? Like, don't just take what I'm telling as truth. Like, bring it into your body. How does it feel? What does it bring up for you? Because it's a conversation, it's an interaction. So with the runes, what you can ask and what we can ask with everything, because there's a creation story for every culture, every ancestry, everything, right? And so the questions we can ask is, well, what happened? How did they get there? How did the runes get in the well before Odin, the Almighty, put his hand in there and grabbed them, right? Did the runes not just put themselves there before Odin? Like, Odin owned the runes, so to speak, but weren't they their own beings? So it's like, who put all these things in Pandora's box? Right. Who gave Pandora the box? And where did they get that box from? Right. And what did they believe? Right. Right. Because it's like in Course in Miracles, right? Whatever, everything has the meaning that we put on it. And once it's like death, when something ends, like when someone dies, if you just stumble upon their things, you don't know that person. You're not going to go, oh, this is Julie's box. Right. No, it's a box. You found it. You don't know whose it is unless there's like identifications there. It's just a box. It doesn't have that meaning. So what if all these things that we judge as evil, bad, monstrous, putrid, all these things, what if they are not that? What if they are that because we've called them that? Right. So this begets a deeper question of, do you believe that there is such a thing as pure evil that exists? It's a really good question. And my honest answer is no, I don't. Because I think that we have to really ask ourselves, what that means. Like, what is pure evil, right?
Yeah, and I'm totally on board with this, but I know I can think of, you know, maybe even some people in my family who might listen to this or say, well, that's absolutely not true. What about a murderer, for example? That's pure evil, is what some might say.
Right.
So from your, I was going to say higher perspective, but I don't even want to make that judgment, you know, from your perspective, how can that be true? How can we have things like rape and murder and all of those things alive on our planet and also hold the belief that there's no pure evil?
So whenever these are really sticky, massively charged places, right? They're really big topics. And so that to me is interesting.
Right.
Like it's like, okay, this is something that is inviting an awareness.
Yeah.
Right. And if we just stay like, it's exactly like me being at the ranch by myself in the dark and the energy is thick with something. What is it thick with? I don't know.
Yeah.
Right. So for me, I think that absolute truths can be dangerous because what they do is they distort our ability to ask questions.
Yes.
Right? So is murder and rape horrible? Yes. But when we put it into a box such as evil, it's like jails and prisons, right? We put it somewhere because we don't want to look at it.
Right.
We don't want to look at what's going on, why it was created.
Right.
What's actually happening.
It's a Band-Aid for a symptom rather than a solution.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because when I think about like, you know, and this is like the same thing as committing suicide, right? When someone chooses to die for whatever reason, they're a criminal, right? That's also, then let's put that in evil as well, because that you've murdered yourself.
Right.
Right. But it's like, so for me with all of these big topics, I'm certainly not like claiming, like, I'm not like, you know, going to become like the woman who claims that there is no pure evil and, you know, that kind of thing. But I'm more so offering the space to allow ourselves to have conversations around some of these really uncomfortable, sticky, charged topics.
Yeah.
Because we're all very drawn to them. Yeah. People watch murder mystery, murder shows, like people love these things. Right. We love horror movies. We like to entertain ourselves with all of these things that we call evil. Right. And judge and turn away from. But when they're on TV, they're the number one watched movie on Netflix, right? When they come out. So what's going on there? You know, so that for me is like that's what's going on there.
It's so true. It's like that is a way for people to unbridle some of that energy that's been suppressed around, whether it's curiosity, whether it's their own tendrils of anger that they've suppressed, or other things that can become transmuted into murderous action. You know, it's like we all have aspects of that, or at least the capability of it within our beingness. And the unwillingness to see that is the first sign that there's imbalance. There's a closed Pandora's box there. Yeah, for sure. And I love this point. And thinking about jails and, you know, drugs and homeless populations and all of this, there's so much snap judgment about populations of people in general, but particularly those who are caught in these cycles of suffering and are unable to break free from their respective addictions. But we all have addictions. We all have addictions. And I'm going to say that again. We all have addictions. I don't care if your addiction is food, if your addiction is your phone, if your addiction is shopping.
Could be yoga.
Yep. Could be yoga. It could be something that looks acceptable.
Could be podcasts.
Could be speaking unkindly to your partner.
Yeah.
Right? We all have addictions, and to put ourselves on a pedestal above others is just not fair. We need to get in touch with the innate suffering that led that person there, because we have that, again, we have that possibility and capability within ourselves. Maybe we were born into a more privileged situation, or we chose a path that was different. But again, we all share that, in that we are human and that we suffer. And the overarching picture for me is that there are a lot of systems currently in place which not only discourage us from asking questions, but cancel us if we do. And that does not feel good to me inside my body when that's happening. And I'm always looking again toward this picture of unity. And if I feel a strong resistance to another or a group of people, that is immediately when I want to turn toward myself and go, what's the story I have around this population right now?
Right. And that's dark work, right?
Yeah, man.
Yeah, man. Exactly. Yeah.
Because it's not about them, it's about you. It's
100%.
about you.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a big one.
It's a big one. Man, there's so many things I want to talk to you about, but in the time that we have left, I want to ask you about, well, you talked about your empathic gifts opening up. And before we started recording, I told you I really resonated with your story around men. And I definitely went through a period of my life where I didn't feel powerful. And the way that I subconsciously, while I was wrestling with my pain story, obtained power for myself was using my sensitivities, my wit, my empathy to get what I wanted. And I can say that now because I can see that very pragmatically. But at the time, I was so innocent. And it was like, I'm just interfacing with the world the way the world's interfacing with me. But it looked like going on a lot of dates that I knew I never wanted to see that person again, but they were going to pay for dinner, or ghosting on people, not texting them back, creating situations where I was desired,
right,
or pitting people against each other. Again, all not consciously. And I want to first just like name that, because there's so much shame flung at the masculine for what they're doing to the feminine. And I just want to do my part in healing that by saying, hey, I know some of this was conditioned into me and all of that, but I still want to own what I did to all the men that I ever hurt or manipulated or was careless with their hearts here. I think that's very, very important to say. But this relates to you in that you describe this period of your life where you could read people's feelings, and in doing that, you would know what to say to please them or guide them in the directionality of getting what you want. I wondered if you would go into that pocket of your life a little bit and your experience with men, and then maybe tell that crazy story from
Thailand.
Yeah.
There's two. Yeah.
I'm thinking of the one where you had to escape.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. First, I want to say you're a very good storyteller.
Thank you.
just want to put that out there.
Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, again, for the thread of my life has been about allowing and opening the space to converse on these things that we all do, but we don't acknowledge and we don't talk about. And it's funny because like when I wrote my book, I was very much just trusting. So whenever anything would pop in, I would just write about it. And then I wouldn't really question it. And then, but like, as we've gotten close to publishing, there's moments where I'm like, should I really keep that in there? And then I'm like, I'm trusting, it's fine. But that discomfort of like, wow, I'm being really vulnerable. I'm exposing myself. I'm putting this stuff out there. Maybe these guys will even read it. Who knows?
Right.
Probably they will, unfortunately, or fortunately. So, I talk about in one of the chapters, like I grew up in a man's world. My dad is very much living a man's world. He's, in oil and gas, like businessman, kind of like women. He's not conscious of this, but he sees women as less than men.
To this day, or?
Yes, for sure. And very much his unconscious belief is that women are for his entertainment, is what I feel. So, but as a kid, I was daddy's little girl, right? And I always associated him with fun, and because he would leave and go on trips, and then he would come home and it would be fun, and he was easygoing, and everyone loved him, very charming. So, the association was like, when dad's around, we're having fun, we're going for dinner, we're doing fun things. He buys me nice things. Like, I have a great time. He loves me, so that really built this relationship of, okay, as long as men love me and are pleased with me, then I'm good, I'm safe, and I'm happy. And at the same time, I had an opposite experience where my mom, who is also an intuitive and really, she has a birthmark across her left eye that she's had since she was a little girl. And she's had a very hard life because she's always felt unworthy, insecure, and really has had a hard time embracing her beauty and her gifts, and has always felt really less than. And that's a really deep, deep wound for her. So, but at the same time, she's so powerful, so gifted. So like when she yelled at that robber, he was out of there. Like when she would step into that energy, it was terrifying because she has that maternal, like sharpness that I always knew was there. And so my experience was, I felt like my dad hated her, which, to be honest, they don't have a good relationship. They never did. It never made sense why they were together. And so again, dad was fun and mom was difficult, emotional, moody, unstable, and also always listening to him and his friends and people around, criticizing her, speaking really horribly about her.
She was the scorned woman.
She was, yeah. She was this witch, right? So for me, I'm like, okay, don't be like that. Don't you dare do that. And also, while that's happening, my mom also had like body image stuff. And that was also like a very nonverbal learning. And so it was like, look good, be skinny, be pretty, and everything's going to be good. You will sail through life. Right. And so that was my roadmap. It was like, that's what you're going to do. And so while that was happening, I was also aware that I could hear people's thoughts often. And I really just knew every person. Like I would meet them and I was like, okay, this person, this is who they are. This is what they like. This is what they don't like. This is what they're feeling. So I will do this. And I just became a chameleon. And so when it came to boys, when I was 12 to 14, I went through like a chubby phase. So I felt really unlovable and unworthy. And all of my friends just so happened to be tiny, like tiny and really pretty, and seemed like all the guys were obsessed with them. I was in the popular group always. And so I very quickly like took it into my own hands. Like I have to change this because guys don't like me. They're not drawn to me. They don't want to be with me. And that's not okay. Because that means I'm not safe. I'm not good. And I'm probably going to be put in the box where my mom is. Right. So I, had an eating disorder, just started to really play the game that I needed to play in order to ensure this safety that I was craving.
What age did that start?
So because I was in Malaysia, clubs and bars, there's no IDing. So, and we had privilege. So we had a driver. My dad wasn't home. He wasn't, our parents weren't very strict, very British, you know,
right.
Like you drink when you're 7 sort of thing. So my brother and I started going out to bars when I was 12 to 13. By 14, wow. I was going out like on the like every weekend, some weekdays. By 16, like I was a regular. My friends and I were at the club pretty much every night, you know, and then not only that, but traveling to other parts of Southeast Asia on the weekends, going to Bali, going to Koh Samui, going to Phuket.
Wow.
The world was our oyster, and for me, it was dangerous because I also had no structure, no boundaries. And so I was constantly pushing the limits and experiencing a lot of, chaos at home, not knowing what to do about that. So needing to move that energy some other way. So it was like a recipe for disaster. I, to this day, sometimes wonder how I made it through. And then I always have this where, you know, it's like sometimes I'm reversing in my car and then it's like, you just get this turn around and I realize there's a car right behind me. It's like, that's what it's been like my whole life. Like I just get that sort of message, guidance, like turn right, go straight, stop, get out of here, do this. And thank goodness, because I would probably be dead, honestly.
Right.
Or in a bad place.
Do you believe that's the voice of the intuition?
Yes, 100%. Yeah. So yeah, my relationship with men became even more chaotic the deeper I got into my eating disorder.
Right. At one point you described like you would only eat
green grapes,
5 green grapes a day. Or like, there was something where you poured orange juice.
Yeah. I'd make like a fruit salad bowl
with orange juice.
Yeah. So,
which to me seems like the most acidic thing you could possibly have and would probably hurt very much to throw up.
100%. And it rarely made sense. And I write about this, like oftentimes what I was doing was wanting to feel pain.
Right.
So it wasn't always escaping. I was escaping emotional pain, but also creating physical pain.
Right. And just a side note is like, I just got snapped back to the ritual that you were describing of people putting the hooks in their skin, which is also like the Sundance ritual. And this very ritualized version of feeling pain. Yeah. And so we judge other cultures who have containers to celebrate, to feel.
Right.
Meanwhile, we're all over here doing it in our own ways, hiding it
secretly,
vomiting it into a toilet, snorting it up our nose, fucking it into somebody else,
and cutting it into our
skin, which was also part of your story. And we normalize it. We hide it and we call that okay.
Well, we don't normalize it though. We just pretend it's not there.
Touche.
Right. Because whenever, I did a interview the other week and one of the women was like, she's bulimic and she's like, in that shame, like she's like, I can't believe you're talking about this. I'm like, well, it's true. Yeah. Like, why would I hide it? Yeah.
Yeah.
So when I was at that point of eating, I would get like 5 green grapes and cut them into like, 10 pieces each grape and just like slowly eat it.
That was your food for the whole day?
That was all I would eat. Yeah.
Why 5?
Gosh, who knows, honestly. It was just a pattern. It was just something that I started to do. And once I did it, it was obsessive and it was all I would do.
Right.
And I don't know why green grapes either. It was just like, that's what the association was created. And from there, that was my safe food and that was all I ate. And if I ever ate anything else, it would become a problem.
Right.
But whenever I would have my bulimic episodes, that was when it was like insane. Right. And I write about this where I would get like, 10 to 20 different plates of meals, a massive glass of water, and then just like leave my body, consume it all in less than 5 minutes, chug the water, run to the bathroom, puke it up. And that would just be like a nightly occurrence.
Wow.
So during that time was when we went to Thailand for my senior trip. And, you know, and I read about this, like, I shouldn't have been there. It's crazy that I was there because I hadn't been to school for at least 6 months. I just stopped going. I didn't care. And I was at that place where I just didn't care. And my mom was honestly scared of me. Like, I got to that place where I was just like, I don't care. Like, don't push me. I will destroy you, sort of.
Right.
Really just a bad, rebellious, not bad. See, there it is. Mm-hmm. Just like rebellious, destructive, chaotic.
You were in pain.
Yeah. And anyone wanted to mess with me, I would make it really bad for them. Mm-hmm. So we went to Thailand. I'm not eating. Now we're drinking. And I'm with my friends, which means game on, competition time. Right. So,
meaning female competition.
Yeah. Okay. Cause that's like, it's all unconscious, right? It's just there. Cause it's like, for me, as long as I am chosen, I'm the chosen one, then I'm safe and I'm at least worthy on the surface. And then I don't have to deal with what's underneath the surface. Mm-hmm. So we, you know, went out I think it was one of the first nights. It was the half moon party, and we started off at like a bar. Everyone had dinner. I didn't. Standard. They were used to it. I smoked cigarettes, sempornas. If you're from Asia, you know those. And we ended up we all had our own like motorbike scooters. We get to driving them drunk. Again, if you've been to Thailand, you know. We get to the half moon party. There's this guy. He's shirtless. He's tall. He's got a 6-pack, curly brown hair. We're all like, wow, who's this guy? Boom. Everyone's interested in him. Mm-hmm. Light goes on. Chloe goes for it, right? So before we know it, I've gotten his attention, lured him in, very much so. And then we leave. I go with him. He asked me to come with him to his place. We go to a beach first. We hang out. We're drinking. I don't remember completely, which is pretty normal when you're this drunk. But I think we might have had sex at the beach. But then we go to his place, and he had like a chalet, like a surfer's chalet on the beach. And we have sex, and we're after sex, and we're in the bed, and I'm like feeling really supported and held and good because I've just pleased him and we've had fun and he likes me and he's really hot. And all of a sudden I get this feeling of like, oh, something's not good. And the door opens and this other guy walks in, and this other guy doesn't feel good. This guy feels not like, he feels dangerous. Mm-hmm. And the way he looked at me was very much like, I felt like he saw me as like meat, mm-hmm. you know, like fresh meat. So he dropped a baggie of something on the bed and he goes, oh, I forget what he says. Something like, it's my turn. And Ed, the guy that I was with, was like, sure, bud. And so
like basically giving him permission to have sex with you.
Yeah, pretty much.
How did that feel?
Oh, I'm like, well, this is like the same thing. Because at this point I didn't have my voice. I don't feel empowered, just like with the robber in the house. Like, do I just lie here?
Right.
You know, because if I make them mad, then then I'm not safe, and then they don't like me. So
they might kill me.
Or they might kill me. Yeah. So I'm really at a conflict in my head. Right. And at the same time, at that point, my desire to be liked is so strong that it overrides any sort of, you know, moral or like emotional understanding of what's good and what's not, or what do I want and what do I not want. And so, yeah, so I'm there, and all of a sudden I get a voice in my head and it says, Chloe, run.
The intuition.
Yeah, there she is. And so I excused myself, grabbed my skirt and my bikini, my red bikini, and I went to the bathroom, and I saw that the bathroom had a window, and I just left. I ran out I squished through the window, which
so
at this point.
So you pretended like you were going to the bathroom,
yeah.
And then I
got
out the window.
Yeah. And so I ran, out of
What are you
their,
wearing right now?
I'm
Just
wearing
a bikini
like
top?
a bikini top, and I've got like it's this top is just a nightmare. It's like a black halter top with a hole in the center, and I've got my red bikini, and I've got this like little jean skirt.
So you're doing like this run of shame.
Massive run of shame. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I leave their chalet area, and I come to, cause I'm in terror at this point and I'm just running. And then I come to my senses in some form, and I realize like, I don't know where I am. I don't have any money. I have like a little bit of money, and my phone is dead. So, and I don't know what the name of the place is that we're staying, because I'm drunk and I'm not paying attention, and I'm being chaotic. Right.
Yeah.
So I basically go through this process of flagging down cabs.
Is it night or morning?
It's early morning.
Okay.
It's like 6-ish, 7. The sun's just
Pretty
rising.
vulnerable time to be by yourself.
Yeah, little 17-year-old Chloe
In a skirt and a halter top in Thailand.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I go through this process of trying to get home to the hotel, going in a cab, giving a name, getting there. It's not the right place. The cab driver's mad at me because I'm being an annoying white girl.
Yeah, didn't he say something under his breath? He said
something, and I was like, for sure he's like hates me. So, and he was pissed. And I remember feeling like I need to get, like, I'm not welcome. He hates me. I got to get out of this car.
Right.
So, I'm at a bad point here. I'm like, I'm never going to get home. This is the end. It's over.
Yeah.
I took it too far this
scary.
time. Yeah. Really scared. And then all of a sudden a name pops into my head, and I remember that it's the name of the place where our guy friends are staying. So I flagged down a guy on a motorbike, and he seemed really friendly, and I told him the name, and he's like, sure, hop on. And I felt like, this guy feels safe.
That's a leap of faith.
Yeah. Yeah. But it was like, I knew that this guy was solid.
Yeah. Because that same thing that was leading you. That intuition.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Trust him.
Yeah.
So he takes me, and it's the guy's house. And so I make it back. And when I get back to the hotel, of course, all my friends are really pissed at me, and with good right, you know. And at this point, they're just kind of like, Chloe, what are you doing, man? We're worried about you.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
What a harrowing
and
story.
The adventures continued, right, until into my 20s. I continued to do some crazy, silly, ridiculous things, just because I was constantly running away from myself.
And what was the big turning point?
So I was with my boyfriend for 7 years. And I really, like you were talking in the beginning before about the guys that you like want to acknowledge. Mm-hmm. He's that. Like I really hurt him. I really dishonored his heart. He loved me so much, and I cheated on him, broke up with him, got back together. Like really just, you know, was super disrespectful. So that happened, and while we were together, I met this other guy who I fell madly in love with, and had this really kind of like twin flamey sort of chaos where I was just obsessed with him. But then I would leave him and go back to the boyfriend, and then leave him, and it was just like jumping around. Right. And so once those two ended, that was when I really was like, it just smacked me in the face, like. This is not going to work.
What are you looking for?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, during that time, and then in between meeting Ferris, my partner now, and then meeting Ferris, and then us having to work through all of our shit kind of colliding, is the turning point. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing. It's so powerful. It's so inspiring. And yeah, we were talking about this before, about how when love, like true love, comes into your life, and, you know, I don't know if I can really call it unconditional, because that is such a high standard for me, but we'll say nearly unconditional love, right? Like this standard of when another person has done enough work that they can gently, but sometimes firmly reflect to you what's yours, just in their ability to be steadfast in their love. And when we try and fling these gooey projections at them, and they just, I'm speaking of my partner Jed here, where he just stares back at me and just like, sometimes no words,
right,
just watches me trail off in whatever word vomit is coming out of my mouth until I recognize the jail that I've trapped myself in.
Right.
And then I usually cry or feel ashamed or embarrassed that that piece is still a piece of my story. And he just witnesses until I work through it and put a rose on the grave of it and decide to move on. And I think until somebody experiences that level of love and partnership in their life, they perhaps don't know the magic that we're talking about. But I am so deeply grateful that you have found it in Ferris. And I believe that that level of partnership can create worlds, and we can do so much more in the world when we allow ourselves to be loved.
Yeah.
When we allow ourselves to be loved. And I can't underscore that enough, because most people go like, of course I'm going to allow myself to be loved. No,
it's hard.
It's hard to let yourself really,
scary.
Yes, really be loved. So thank you for being an ambassador of love, both of you, and giving so much hope with your story. It's such a powerful book. I know that you had an experience. One part I thought was really interesting was you went to a writing retreat with Elizabeth Gilbert and Cheryl Strayed, right?
Yeah.
How was that experience?
It was awesome. I went with my mom. I had already gone on a 2-week writing retreat with Cheryl Strayed the 6 months before in Greece. So I had already really gotten to know Cheryl, and my mom and I had been to an Elizabeth Gilbert workshop before. So we're just like, following. And so they decided to put something together, which was cool because it was the first time that Elizabeth and Cheryl had ever met in person.
Wow.
Yeah,
really?
It was. So they had been, when Cheryl's book came out, Elizabeth emailed her. And,
which book was that?
Wild.
Okay.
When Wild came out and became this huge success, Elizabeth reached out to Cheryl, and they began to become like pen pals.
Cool.
Because the level that Wild kind of grew to, Elizabeth really knew from her experience with Eat, Pray, Love, right? So they became like sisters, but they had never met. So they decided to put on this
cool
workshop, a blending of their book. At the time, Elizabeth's was Big Magic and Cheryl's was Brave, so they called it Brave Magic.
Cool.
So it was at 1440 University in California, and it was wonderful. My mom and I love doing things like that. So we had a really great time. And on the last day, there were about 200 people, probably 195 of which were women, and then the 5 men. And on the last day, there was like an intimate Q&A. And this was the first time that Elizabeth had done a public thing or any sort of thing in like workshop since a lot of her life had changed. And what I mean is that she had left her husband from Eat, Pray, Love.
Right.
And basically, so that was like the first bomb that she dropped on the world, right? It's like her personal life, but there you go. And then after that, she shared that she had fallen in love with her best friend, who was a woman,
right,
who was also battling cancer.
Yeah.
And I don't remember, but I feel like she hadn't died at that point. She was still alive.
Right.
So this was a tender time for Elizabeth. And so she had boundaries, right? Which was cool because I had seen her growth, because the first workshop my mom and I went to hers was probably 2 years before. And she did book signings. She was so open. Everyone, it was like she worked. She was available for anything and everything that everyone wanted.
Right.
So this time there were no book signings. And so the Q&A was about to begin, and Elizabeth stood up and she's like, hold on, Cheryl. And, you know, they were really playful because it was like they had just met, but they were already really good friends. She's like, do you have any, you know, like rules and regulations for your Q&A? And Cheryl goes, well, no, not really. You know, I mean, it's a Q&A. And what's going to happen? And Elizabeth goes, well, I do. So, and she had some sort of story, as a writer does, to back up what she was going to tell.
Right.
But she goes, here's what a Q&A is. A question is usually one sentence with a question mark at the end. I don't want to hear your story.
Right.
I don't want to know why you came here.
Right.
I don't want to know why I mean so much to you. Mm-hmm. Right? She's saying this, standing up.
Right.
And as she's saying this, I feel like I'm viscerally feeling waves of energy moving through the room as everyone is processing.
And they're releasing what they were about to ask.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it broke her rules.
Everyone's like probably come just to tell her that, you know, they bought their
hero. Yeah.
Eat, Pray, Love. They went to Bali and da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, right?
Right.
So I'm loving this because I've never witnessed this before. Yeah. And this is just like unbelievable. I'm like eating this up, right? My mom as well. We're both like, this is amazing. Mm-hmm. And so she finishes, she sits down, and one of the ushers, you know, she picks on a person and the usher brings the mic and the lady stands up. She goes, so I know you just shared all of these things, but I'm going to be really brave. And literally Elizabeth stands up and walks up to her, like walks through the aisle. Yeah. I was going to say hallway. And she goes, no, please. I'm sorry. Sit down. And literally you hear everyone gasps. Wow. Right? It was like a movie. And she goes, but she's like, no, I'm sorry. Sit down. Right?
Wow.
It was really powerful. And, you know, she's like, we'll come back to you if you have a question. Otherwise, we're going to move on. Wow. And she just moves on. It was amazing.
Wow.
And I mean, for me, I got what I needed from that workshop.
Yeah. And I bet it was a powerful Q&A. People probably really stuck to the point and didn't waste time.
It did. But I think also like it really impacted people. And so maybe people didn't even have, like, less people ask questions because they were scared of her. Like, oh God, I don't want to get told off by Elizabeth. Right. Cause it was, and you could see her change.
Right.
She was sharp. She wasn't messing around. And if you crossed her boundary, she's going to let you know.
Right.
And that's like the rules with spirit that I talked about.
Right.
It's that sort of like, she's in her center. She's not going to budge. And that was what I was always searching for. And I talk about this in the book. Like, this was what I wanted and was searching for, as like elders to teach me this, so that I could be in a situation where the, you know, guy walks in the room and he's like, oh, my turn. And it's like, no,
right.
I'm not doing this. Bye-bye. You know what I mean?
Right.
So, and it was interesting because after, a lot of the people from the Cheryl Strayed Greece writing retreat were there, because we're all like her people, and they all kind of gathered outside and called me over, and they're like, what did you think about that? Was so crazy. And some of them were saying some pretty harsh things about Elizabeth, and like praising Cheryl for not doing the same thing.
Right.
And I was like, guys, are you joking? Yeah. Like, that was amazing. And we're literally proving why it's so important that she just did that. Right? Because everyone's like, what a bitch. Like, right. I can't believe she did that. She's so mean. All the things that we say about women when they step into their power.
Right.
So.
Right. Well,
life-changing.
Elizabeth Gilbert, if you're out there,
kudos.
Props. Thanks for helping us learn how to set boundaries.
Yeah. Massively.
Yeah. Ah, Chloe, this has been amazing. I seriously could go with you forever.
Yeah.
But since we don't have forever, I would love for you to talk about your book, which will probably be newly released by the time this episode comes out.
Yeah.
Where can people purchase your book, and where can they find you and all of your other offerings online? If you want to talk about what your offerings are, we'd love to hear it.
Thanks, Hallie. So yeah, the book is called Revealed by Darkness. It'll be available on Amazon, hopefully bookstores. We'll see. It's the self-publishing journey, but definitely on Amazon. You can find me on my website, channeledbychloe.com, and my Instagram is channeledbychloe. And in terms of offerings, I do lots of different things. So psychic medium, I do psychic medium readings. I also do intuitive mentoring for people that are really wanting to develop their intuitive skills and really get into, the things that we're talking about, and go into and befriend the dark. Like if there's a part of you that feels that sort of like intrigue of darkness and intrigue of, your own gifts and your work, that's definitely what my mentoring is. And then I also do some like bespoke offerings. I do psychic soul journeys, which are kind of like shamanic healing journeys, where we do more past, present, future healing. That's distance. And then I also offer spell casting sessions, which are really fun. They're for if you're looking for more support in the spirit world and you're drawn to working with magic. I do kind of a blend of Celtic and some hoodoo and I do a lot of like candle magic, and I bring in the runes, and the spell casting sessions are really fun. Like if you're drawn to dabbling in magic, then that's a great way to go. Yeah.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, sister.
Of
this
course.
has been so fun and so beautiful. I cherish you. I can see all that you've walked through, and reading your story affirmed all of that. So thank you so much for taking the time to sit with me today.
I've loved this. I've loved this chat. I've loved like the questions you've asked and where you've led it. It's been really fun. So thank you.
Thanks.